Welcome, and it's nice to be back again. And for those of you who saw the previous one, I have actually put a few changes into this and updated some of the presentations, so you can spot the difference along the way. So we're going to look at how to support pupil, staff, and parental well-being while the school's closed. And you know, the structure is pretty Ronseal about it, so it's following how each of those sort of three areas. But I think just to sort of set the context, I'll talk a little bit about Kellett, because our school closures didn't start with COVID. They actually started last November when the Hong Kong protests were on. And because of those protests, we ended up being closed for 7 days. And looking back, that was quite a formative period for us, because we tried at that point to go to home learning. We did do home learning in terms of remote learning, but we didn't do any live teaching. And we realized that we needed to put a whole load of things in place to support the live teaching aspect of home learning. And so we did a lot of work around the logistics of how we might do that. We tested various platforms and so on, because we were sort of fully expecting to have a closure because of a typhoon or because of further protests. We didn't see COVID coming, but in practice, when it actually came, which for us was during our Chinese New Year holiday at the end of January, we actually found ourselves pretty much ready to move to a home learning program, both in terms of our platform and in terms of doing some live teaching in secondary. So the last teaching day that we had was actually the 24th of January. So we are now in week 11, or midway through week 11 of home learning, and we had that doesn't include the 2 weeks Easter break that we had. So it's been quite a journey for us. So, you know, and I think one of the things about this journey is, and one of the lessons and takeaways from this is that there were many false summits along the way. We were first told that we would be closed for 4 weeks, and then that was extended by another couple of weeks, and then it was suspended until the end of the Easter holidays, and then suspended until further notice. And actually, the really good news is that it looks like we're going to be back in some form on the 25th of May, because in Hong Kong now we've got to the point where we've had 0 cases for the past 4 days, and I think we've only had 3 or 4 cases in the last 10 days, and all of those were people who'd come into Hong Kong from outside. So we're at the point now where there's sort of light at the end of the tunnel, and we're planning, we've started our planning for reopening, and I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the issues that we think we might encounter there. So turning initially to pupil wellbeing, and particularly in our prep schools. As you're no doubt finding, it's really difficult to address well-being issues remotely, but we realised that we had to do that, and we've done that in a number of ways. So initially we did it through things like assemblies. So here is Ben Dixon, the head teacher at one of the prep schools in the Kellett group, and he's doing an assembly on worry bag. And we had, you know, people put their worries in the bag, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about the fact that people have worries and that you've got to address them and so on. So that sort of online assembly is a fairly straightforward way of doing it. We realized fairly early on that even the youngest students were really missing their teachers. And so although we don't actually do very much live teaching, and we've gradually moved over the sort of 11-week period towards doing more live teaching in the prep, we moved to having sort of like a morning registration, a morning circle time, an opportunity for the students to see the teacher and sort of effectively have that feeling of being part of the class. because yeah, and that took a little bit of the time for the children to get used to it, but it was a really effective way of doing things. We've also looked at, it also gave a touch point for teachers to sort of meet with the children, and we've also done that on a one-to-one basis as well, where teachers have actually contacted families and just checked in with the students in terms of their progress, but also in terms of their well-being. And the other thing we've done is we've tried to create community type events to keep our community together, even though we're separated. And so very, very early on, we had musical events. The first one actually we did was a really simple one, which was that everybody one day wore red, which is our school colour. And so all the teachers wore red, all the students wore red, and everybody sent in photos, and we produced a sort of photo montage of everybody wearing red. But there was that sense of identity and community, and that was really very important. And I think these sorts of events that pull the community together are really important. Another one was to sort of have a happiness wall, and everybody sent in what made them happy. And you can see on the screen there a whole range of things that everyone was talking about being happy. Again, a focus on well-being, a focus on trying to bring the community together, and this is a really important part of it. And then another community event that we did was to do sort of a sing up. So the music department produced a sort of video with sort of effectively like a karaoke track with the words on, sent it out to all the students. They then sang along in their homes to the track. They filmed themselves doing that, and then we weaved it into a community video, which I will spare you showing. But it's one of those great events, and the screenshot is actually part of that way, and you can see the sort of, it captures the essence of really what was going on there. People singing along to a song. We were at the time were able to have our staff in school, and so they actually sang collectively, but everyone else sort of logged in literally from around the world in order to join in that community event. The senior school has followed a similar pattern as well. Lots of well-being. I mean, Kellett is a positive education school, so well-being activities are very much part of our sort of DNA as a school. So from day one, we were incorporating them into our program. So we're producing a weekly newsletter for both prep and for secondary. And one of our teachers, Sandra Bushnell, has particular interest in mindfulness. She's got her own YouTube channel. She produces very short mindfulness videos, and we've been able to send one of those out a week to our community as part of linked on our newsletter. I've put her YouTube channel there and her Twitter address, so you can sort of track and pick up those resources quite easily from those addresses. But Sandra's, it's obviously has contributed throughout this period, hugely with the work she's done there. And then moving into, there's another sort of shot of it there. And then in secondary also, we've sort of had sort of formal and informal ways of doing things. So we've had sort of daily tutor meetings. We've kept those as part of our program. So the tutor group would get together and they can check in with their tutor. One of the things that I wish we'd done earlier, and I'll be talking a bit more about, is the fact we gave wellbeing questionnaires. And I think one of the things that we didn't do is we weren't doing wellbeing questionnaires before, so we don't know what the baseline data is. But it's been very interesting to track it. I'm going to share those data with you through our journey. We've also been able to offer one-to-one counselling, so our wellbeing team have been able to check in with people who are perhaps struggling a little bit more and do online counselling. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the protocols that we put in place around that, because getting the paperwork around one-to-one work on online is obviously quite important. So we always have a Feel Good Friday. It's a big part of our school, particularly in the senior school, and we've had some great events. I think the most notable was that we did an open mic event where students were, we basically streamed it through a live YouTube broadcast. We used a mixing desk. The students sort of sent in, sort of streamed in from their channel from home, so they could, and it actually was a live performance live to the school. And that was great. It was a great feeling of community, even though our students were actually, you know, spread out all over the world at the time. So that was really a good event. And those sorts of community events at every level are really important at this time. Events to bring the community together, to have that sense of belonging, the fact that, you know, we're competing with isolation at the moment. People feel very separate. They feel isolated from the school. And so anything that can bring the community together becomes a really important thing. So whether it's a book event, or whether it's, you know, producing a playlist, or whether it's an open mic competition or a sing up, all of these things are really important for bringing the community together. And then one of the really lovely projects was students writing letters of gratitude to their teachers. This is a the benefit of this is two-way really. I mean, one for the students, and there's a whole number of reasons why it's beneficial for the students on the screen at the moment, but it's also obviously hugely beneficial for the recipients. So you know, this was an initiative from our wellbeing team. And it was great because, you know, 1,000 letters were sent from students, 400 from parents, a real boost to the community. And I'll put on screen, the typical letter, a couple of sample letters, which are great because it's one of those things where, you know, people have, you know, perhaps absence makes the heart grow fonder, but people are really enjoyed the opportunity to reflect and think about school and the value of school, and to reflect on how important their teachers are to them, and to say thank you. And that was a lovely way in which that was done, and that was very important. One other way we've done this is to set up a student wellbeing website. So we've actually, as part of our website, built a section around wellbeing. We're putting a lot of stuff on there in terms of advice, in terms of cabin fever and coping with stress and the virus and so on. So a really useful thing. There's also a lot of sort of exercise videos and advice on, you know, washing hands and all the usual stuff, but it gave us an opportunity as a community to bring all that together, and the wellbeing team did an amazing job just sort of capturing that. I think they had a lot of fun making the videos as well. So I mentioned previously about the idea of questionnaires, and so we took a questionnaire. The main thrust of the questionnaire was around looking at pupil progress, really, and were they coping with the workload, were they coping with the new ways of working, were there ways in which we can improve. But we threw in a sort of temperature check question in terms of where people were, and this gave us a sort of idea of, you know, how well people were coping, and we were, you know, really quite pleased with roughly where we were in terms of the numbers, in terms of the number of students who were really coping very well. Some were really thriving in that situation, and I'll come back to that when we look at lessons learned. But we took the view that anyone who'd self-reported with a score of 4 or less, we would follow up on a personal level, and they would be offered the opportunity to have a one-to-one counselling session. And so those students, the wellbeing team got in touch with those students, and we were able to follow up and provide the support. So the questionnaire just gave us a bit of a, you know, a sort of corporate, you know, overall temperature check, but it also gave us the opportunity to give targeted support throughout the closure, and that was very important. So they were the statistics from week 3. Moving to week 6, the picture had generally improved very slightly, but we still had a group of students who were struggling. And again, this gave us an opportunity to engage and continue our work with them. Interestingly, we did one again last week in week 10, and the pictures improved massively after week 10, partly perhaps for, I think there are 2 driving reasons for that. One was they'd just come back the back of a 2-week break, so they were perhaps a bit more refreshed. They'd had a break from everything, but also it was the first opportunity we had to actually ask our examination years, year 11, 12, and 13, to how they felt about things. And as you can see, the majority of them felt much better that, that there was, in a sense, clarity that the exams weren't going to happen. And obviously we followed up with the 9.6% who were upset, and they're people who felt that they'd perhaps underperformed during the year, and really were looking forward to the opportunity of the exams to sort of raise their grade and everything. And therefore there's an anxiety around predicted grades. And I think that's something that schools are going to have to manage at the moment in terms of well-being, that there will be this disparity between students who are confident that they've done the work and their grades and everything will be fine, and those that in their heart of hearts are knowing that this might not play very well for them. So that's a sort of an important aspect of the sort of well-being at the moment, is this focus around the exams. We actually have in the international sector, we have AS levels still. So the year 12s were expecting to sit AS modules, and that's been an area of anxiety, because obviously an ongoing anxiety, because it doesn't look like they're going to get UMS marks for those. So they may well have to take those exams in November or January, or they can take a sort of standardized grade and just have their A level marked on their A2 work. So there's a lot of concern around that, but I think generally we were pleased that the exam groups were pretty comfortable with where they've done, and we were able to provide support. So I mentioned issues about one-to-one tutorials, and we were initially quite concerned about the idea of having a one-to-one live tutorial. I mean, it could be fraught with all sorts of difficulties, and yet we realized that there was actually, when you balance risks, and a lot of this stuff is about balancing risks, there was a greater risk of not providing one-to-one support for some of our more vulnerable and the students who needed that one-to-one support. By not providing it was going to be a greater risk than actually the risks of something going wrong with the one-to-one tutorials. And so we worked really hard. So initially we didn't do them, and we sort of said there would have to be small groups and so on. But then we took the principle that that we use in school, that effectively you have to sort of protect yourself from in those situations. So actually, what we've ended up doing is we ended up recording the tutorials very much in the way in which this webinar is being recorded. One of the features of Zoom, which we're using, is that it will allow for a cloud-based recording. It doesn't have to be held locally. And to be honest, nobody's going to go and look at it unless there is, an accusation or a sort of complaint. We haven't had any, I hasten to add. But it does give, but we have to get permissions in place. There has to be some paperwork. And on my LinkedIn page, I've got I've written a series of articles, one of which is around paperwork, and I've shared in that article all of the Kellett paperwork around these sorts of things, the one-to-one tutorials and so on, so that everyone doesn't have to sort of reinvent the wheel. Obviously, we're working in a slightly different jurisdiction, and I know that some of the unions in the UK have said that this is not a good idea. We've taken the view that it was really important to support some of our most vulnerable students, and we put measures in place that we believe have actually protected both the student and the teacher and to make that a safe space. Now, the interesting thing is that, if you look at, one of the things that came out of our questionnaires, and one of the things I actually got the most feedback from doing this webinar a few weeks ago was around our reorganisation of the timetable. So one of the things that came back from our first questionnaire was that in week 3 was that over a third of our students were really struggling with that and thought that the work was too much. And when we dug into that, it was the intensity of a day, a whole day, being sort of zoomed out, if you like. And so we hit upon the idea of reorganizing our timetable. And so what we did is that normally we have 6 50-minute lessons in the day, and we actually moved those to being 40-minute lessons and moved them all effectively into the morning. We moved all the sort of games lessons, assemblies and all those sorts of things into the afternoon, and some of the sort of more project-based sort of problem-solving, design technology type work into the afternoons as well. And this has gone down really well. It was a win for all 3 of our communities. It was a win for our pupils because, in a sense, all the Zooms happen in a consolidated period in the morning, but they weren't any in the afternoon. It was a win for our parents because it meant that families could take exercise together rather than it being timetabled with sort of PE lessons, games lessons scattered throughout the week. And it also was a win for our staff because it meant that they had time, in the afternoons where the work that the students were working on set work rather than following a full Zoom teaching program. And that gave the teachers a bit of time, a bit of respite time to be able to do their preparation and marking. And I think, I've had a lot of conversations with people from the UK and the UAE over the past couple of weeks. And one of the things is people are trying to deliver their full program over the course of the whole day. And then teachers are coming off the back of that absolutely exhausted. Students are coming off the back of that absolutely exhausted, and so are parents. And actually, the well-being aspect of this has, we've moved back. Now, we actually spent a lot of time planning this and launching it. And if you want a lot more detail on that, we produced a video which was originally intended to be an internal video explaining the rationale and how we did it and why we did it. But that YouTube video there with Joe, who's our head of the senior school, and his team all talking about how they did it. It is a really useful go-to sort of piece if you want to emulate it, and also if you want to say, look, we're not alone in this. Because I think probably we're at a situation in the UK now, sort of 2-3 weeks in, where actually people are going to realise this isn't sustainable, and we need to get back to something a bit more manageable. And then looking at the questionnaire, and this was I think this is the week 6 questionnaire, so I should say that. So this was the response, and actually most people preferred the new structure, and we've still got a minority who preferred the longer day. And I think that slightly reflects the demographics of our school community. We have a large expat community who I think will get out and take exercise, and we've got an element of the community who for social distancing reasons probably won't leave the house, and so for them having a more structured day is a key part of it, and so that's probably where that minority comes from. Moving on to sort of some key lessons learned, and I think that some takeaways that we've picked up really. And the first one is that the normal pastoral issues that we face in the school are still there. They haven't gone away. People are still coping with families who are bereaved, or coping with families who have found they've got, someone close to them's got cancer. There are a whole range of pastoral issues that we deal with on a routine basis, and those pastoral issues haven't disappeared just because there's a lockdown or just because there's a virus. And so we're still handling and supporting a number of our students in the way that we always would. The second one is that some people, for some students, some of these, the whole homeschooling thing takes on a very different complexion. I'll briefly give two examples. One is that we've got a student within the school who's a school refuser, doesn't really like coming to school. That whole getting up, getting out, getting into school, having to mix with other people is a real struggle for that student. And so for them, the home learning program is an absolute godsend. It's they can do their learning. They can, there isn't that pressure on them that there is normally to do that. And for students like that, the return to school will be a cause of anxiety, because this has been a very easy period for them. The second one is one of our students had a very bad skiing accident at Christmas, and was unable to come into school. And so for the 3 weeks in January when we were in school, was actually, getting a bit of work was getting sent home. But obviously it's interesting now that, we've moved to a full home learning program. That's much more supportive to the student who is unable to come to school because of, they've had an accident. And that's made us think quite deeply about how we do support students when they are physically unable to come to school, say because they've had a skiing accident, rather than just sending a bit of ad hoc work home in the way that I think most schools do. I think probably going forward we're going to try and look at how we can provide some sort of blended home learning program, a bit of live teaching and so on. So I think that'll be one of the things that we'll work on going forward. And the third area, which is quite a significant area, is that that families are dealing with a whole range of stresses because of the virus. There's obviously concern that family members are going to fall ill or have fallen ill, or in some cases may actually have died. There's acute financial crisis happening. Family events are cancelled, isolation, and also all the trouble of sort of cabin fever, especially in Hong Kong, where our apartments tend to be very small. There's some real issues there. So there's a whole raft of new wellbeing issues. So I think those three categories, I think, are quite helpful in terms of looking at your wellbeing program and how you deliver it in your schools. So moving on to staff wellbeing. So we were really lucky in the first 6 weeks because we were able to be in school. The school was closed to students, but we were allowed to have staff on site, and we made the decision that we would ask staff to come in 3 days a week, which we saw as a balance between being sort of home working and but also the advantages of being in school was that there would be a sense of collegiality, there would be a sense of collaborative working. People were able to produce different quality of videos. And I mean, I've put a couple of examples on the pictures there, the staff had a lot of fun producing some really high quality teaching resources, as in the Henry VIII Anne Boleyn video and Suez Shape Shop and so on. And these are opportunities for staff to work together, to collaborate, and to produce some high quality home learning content in the primary schools. It also gave us an opportunity to have a lot of inset, particularly around upskilling in terms of use of technology. And it also provided a whole raft of well-being activities, which we could do at sort of lunch times and breaks and so on. So But I mean, the problem was that, you know, for some people there was huge anxiety about this. You know, was it dangerous to come into work, you know, and so on. But actually, I think from a well-being perspective, the ability to get staff together, you know, on a even if it's not every day, but to actually have that support. So we're now at the other end of this, and sort of, you know, the other end of the bell curve, as it were. So we're now in a situation where we look like we're coming back to teach on the 25th of May. We're looking to get staff in from the 11th of May on a 3-day-a-week basis. So we've flagged that up already to the staff, so it's not a surprise, so they can plan for it, they can put childcare in place and so on. And so that we can get back to that sort of collaborative working, but also get back to the sort of, you know, getting everyone back into a different, you know, going back to the sort of traditional at-school routine, and I think that's going to be really important. In secondary, we did a lot of live teaching. We were doing, but people tended to do it from their classrooms. Again, there was that sense of collegiality and support. Again, there was the ability to provide inset, and we also were able to put on a whole range of well-being activities, you know, in the lunch times and so on. So, I mean, that was a program for one of our weeks that we were able to put on in that period when the community were coming together. They're of course now stopped because everyone's been working from home. So we're now in the situation that many people are in around the world. So we've been working from home, producing online lessons, video lessons with some live touch points in the prep, and teaching a lot of live teaching in the senior schools using Google Classroom as our platform. So one of the things that we felt was really important was that we were able to do a staff wellbeing survey. Very simple survey, yeah, it can be done. Worth doing. We've got another one going out after this. We're heading for a bank holiday weekend here. So there's going to be a wellbeing survey for staff going out next week. And that will throw up some of the issues and anxieties about return to school, and we'll be able to address that. Moving to sort of parental well-being, I meant to add in the other big thing we've been doing with staff actually is we've been doing pub quizzes. Tonight there is a pub quiz. We have a quiz master who is working on it. The teams work in Zoom. The quiz master is doing a live broadcast using YouTube, and the answers are being submitted through a Google form. So if that doesn't capture the essence of the lockdown, I don't know what does. So moving on to parental well-being. Parents are really have got these challenges, and I've touched slightly on them. You know, this idea of health, you know, people dying, family members dying, and so on. Family events being cancelled, you know, weddings being postponed, and you know, important celebrations being postponed. The economy doing what the economy is doing, and the uncertainty about jobs and so on in a major recession. These are real pressures. And then there's also concerns, you know, from parents about exams and their child's education and where they're going. There's also that sort of issue around cabin fever and the idea that, you know, trying to combine working from home, supporting home learning, everyone living in close quarters, you know, being in lockdown. These are really stressful occasions, and you know, parents, you know, are feeling it. And I mean, the great thing about Britain is that, you know, the real difference between the Hong Kong approach to lockdown and the approach here in Hong Kong is, you know, in Britain you just find humour, and that, you know, and it's been a really important bit of the British way of coping with it, but you know, it hasn't been part of that here. But you know, quite quite understandably, we've had, pushback from parents, particularly around the financial aspects of it, because we're a fee charging school. We may be not for profit, but we still charge fees. So, I mean, there have been, whenever there have been announcements, so whether it was the announcement of the extension of the closure or the cancellation of the British exams or sending out fee letters, there's been sort of pushback from parents, and these become a focus of anxiety, particularly where there's concern, where people are really struggling at home with coping with having children at home and the prospect of that being extended, or where there's real financial need, where people's jobs are lost and there's no support, or they're self-employed and their business is going down the swanny. There's real anxiety, and these occasions where the school needs to provide support to parents, and in many ways we have done so through a phone call, the tutors, having a chat with parents, and parents are able just to offload themselves. We've really worked on communication during the closure. We usually have a couple of newsletters a term. We've gone to one a week, well, 2 a week really. We've got a prep version and a secondary version every week going out, which has put a lot of pressure on the comms team, but it has meant that we've been able to pull the community together. We've been able to get clear messaging. And one of the things that we hit upon early on is that important messaging we've done using video content, because it's much more personal. Sometimes, if it's just a written email or a letter or something, the tone, the sort of compassion or whatever doesn't come across. So we've tried to use video content in order to express where things are. So just looking ahead, a few issues that we're looking at in terms of looking ahead. It is a bit of a blank. We don't quite know what we're heading for, but we think there's going to be a sense of loss. I think that when we come back together, there'll be a sense that we lost a lot of time. There's going to be a sense that people have left the school, whether it's students graduating, whether it's teachers leaving. We've got a member of staff leaving after 30 odd years in the school, and it's very difficult to look at how we're going to celebrate his exit after such a long and distinguished career. But every sixth former is going to, every upper sixth former is, it sort of has fizzled out. So I think that filling that gap in some way is going to be really important. There's going to be anxiety around how we go about, how young people coming back into school. There's going to be a great euphoria and there's a great sense of relief, but we're expecting parents are going to be very anxious about whether their child has made sufficient progress during the period of home learning. There'll be anxiety particularly around next year's examination groups. We've already got a lot of anxiety around grades for our AS students at the moment, we've got 18 students who are looking to apply to Oxford and Cambridge. So those grades are really important to them, their predictions, their universities, their aspirations. So all of those things, we're going to have to pick up those pieces. And there's also that sense of sort of bringing the whole community back together again and sort of having sort of corporate events. And so I think all of these are issues that we're going to have to deal with moving forward. So final thoughts. So I used the analogy when I did this talk a couple of weeks ago of a marathon, and I do think, and my advice then, is what it is now. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Don't go off too fast. And I think that people have gone off too fast around the world. People have set themselves to higher standards, and I think settling back into a sustainable pace is probably where a lot of places need to be at the moment, and that might mean reorganising the timetable in order to do that. Take every opportunity to refresh yourself. I mean, we've got a bank holiday weekend coming up here. I know it's going to be an important sort of, watering hole for the school. The whole community can have, a few days off from home learning, and also we can get our sort of head around the idea of where we're going. There's also going to be lots of sort of full summits down the line. We've had 4 occasions when things have been bumped, and I think it would be enormously painful for us now to have another one. So I'm really hoping that the 25th of May is when it's going to happen for at least some of our students. Remember that certain people in your community are going to hit the wall. People really will struggle, and they will need some help, and that's all part of this particular journey. And my sort of final advice, I suppose, is that if you want to go quickly, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And this is about community. It's looking after the well-being of an individual student is about looking after the well-being of the whole community and carrying everyone with us. Thank you all very much.
Perfect.
Right,
thanks, Mark. So yeah, so we've had some questions come through. So the first one, would you mind just putting the details back up of the mindfulness teacher that you shared on one of the first slides, if that's okay? Just had a couple of questions about that.
Let me see if I can do that easily. That was quite early on, wasn't it? So
yeah, at the beginning.
That's probably the best one. That's her YouTube channel.
Perfect. Brilliant, thank you. We have had a question come through from Vanessa asking around inviting the students to write to the teachers. How did you get them to do this? Did you do an assembly when you asked them to write to them, or was it letters out to home? How did you get them to?
No, I think it was done with an assembly, and the whole idea. I mean, we're doing a lot of video communication around those sort of things. So I think that was set up in that way, and then instructions sent through. So yeah. And they all picked a teacher that was special to them. I don't think it was choreographed, so, but very
Perfect.
popular.
Thank you. Cool. With the questionnaire that you asked to the secondary school students, what kind of questions did you ask? Was there lots of questions, or was it just a couple, just a few questions around that?
Yeah, we did. It wasn't very long. I mean, I think it was 7, 8 questions about how you're coping with your the workload, and rating themselves in terms of their learning, the engagement, how easy they were finding the online learning as opposed to the live learning. I mean, each school's going to have to tailor those, but they were fundamentally around how easy the students, or difficult they were finding the learning program. So we could get, I mean, I think what we found, we were pretty much in the vanguard of this, and we realised it was going to be a long haul, and possibly a much longer haul than you're going to get in the UK, but I mean the UAE have got it until the rest, for the rest of the term. So we knew it was going to be a long haul for us. And I think it was important that we got feedback at a relatively early stage on what was working, what wasn't, because there was no point sort of rolling it out for 12 weeks if we could have tweaked it at an early stage.
Cool, thank you. Just one regarding the one-to-one sessions with the students and the recordings of those. Who stores the recordings? Are they kept within the individual, or is it just on your school's cloud?
When you have we have a Zoom Pro account, and therefore it goes on to the Zoom. You have a sort of school area, so you would end up with a Zoom Pro cloud recording. I mean, it's possible to do local recordings if you want to. If you'd prefer to do that, they can be done. We just felt it was the access issues were probably safer by just leaving them there, and then they'll sort of naturally time out and get deleted over a period of time, because we don't really need them, and we certainly didn't want them as a record of the counselling session. It was really only in the case of that teacher said this, did that, or whatever, and we needed just to protect people. But to be honest, most of the protection comes from the fact that people know it's being recorded. It's people tend to behave. If you know that there's the possibility that that you're going to get caught, then people tend to behave. I wouldn't expect anyone not to behave, but it certainly was there, and we did it through cloud recording.
Thank you. You mentioned around changing the timetable for the secondary students. Did you do the same for the prep pupils? Did their timetables change at all? And how did parents manage this with, say, multiple younger children?
So the prep, initially we didn't have any live teaching, and I think we were on a learning curve, and then we were able to roll it down to year 5 and 6, as part of their teaching. But again, we have tried to keep it, with the we've tried to keep it pretty much in the morning so that people have got flexibility. And I think they've had to juggle around a little bit with the specialist teaching in order to do that. But the prep timetables, have a lot more teacher, especially when you get down to the younger year groups. You've got the teachers are running a class over over a couple of hours. They might do several different sort of subjects within that. So there's a bit more flexibility built into the system. So the only difficulty was around timetabling specialist teaching, which, for example, language teaching, I think ended up having a bit more live teaching put in like that.
Thank you. We've got a question here from Tammy that says that they have a Twitter page for wellbeing, and the wellbeing team posts daily positive quotes and challenges and links to videos for mental health, but they're finding that they don't get much feedback from parents or engagement from parents. Do you have any recommendations on how they can get the parents more involved with that?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's quite a funny thing, because it really isn't very big here in Hong Kong with parents. So we've not really used it. Actually, Facebook still has a much bigger traction here than Twitter with parents, but we've really relied on our weekly newsletters, and that's given us an opportunity to build in specific wellbeing activities, and also we've been able to build wellbeing activities into the teaching and learning program that are going out through Google Classroom. So some of those activities are going out through there, but the sort of central ones, like the mindfulness videos, are going out through the weekly newsletter.
Perfect, thank you. We have one here from Emily asking about how are you managing recruitment during this period, and particularly around observed teaching?
I think you just can't do it. You can't do observed teaching during this period at all. I think I think there are certain questions that you can ask that you can get a feel for the sort of person the teacher is. But it is really difficult to do. International schools face this problem all the time, so we rarely have the opportunity to observe lessons as part of our recruitment process. So I suspect the ways in which we do our recruitment are slightly different. So whether we, certainly I was involved in some interviews on secondary, and you could ask a question like, pick a topic within the syllabus and tell me how you teach it, and go around that. And I think you can see whether people have got a good imagination for good training and grounding in pedagogy. But no, it's an absolute nightmare. It's going to be it's very difficult. But I think it's always a bit of an act of faith with international recruitment anyway, and I think that's. You have to find other proxies in the questions that you ask, and the ways in which the interviews are conducted in order to fulfill that gap.
Thank you. We've had quite a few questions around returning on the 25th of May. We've got one here asking about when you return, are you going to have social distancing in mind, and how are you going to manage that?
Well, I think the government will insist that we have a degree of social distancing in mind. So, I mean, there's a debate, for example, whether we're allowed to have meals, school meals provided, and meals in school. We may, I mean, one of the options is that we'll have mornings only. But I think there will have to be a degree of social distancing. I think we are going to have to go back to slightly more Victorian layouts to classrooms, in terms of, you know, sort of all the desks sort of a metre apart, sort of type thing, a bit more like an exam hall. But I think that will inevitably be one of the things that we'll have to look at coming back. I think we are all going to have to wear masks here in Hong Kong because it's sort of almost socially unacceptable not to. So I think, yeah, and you know, Hong Kong have approached this whole thing rather differently to the UK. So, you know, we've in total, you know, given a population of, you know, 8 million the size of London plus, you know, we've had only just over 1,000 cases and only 4 deaths, because I think social distancing is a bit more sort of part of the culture here that Hong Kong suffered quite badly during SARS in 2003 and learned a lot of lessons then. So I think, yes, I think there will be a degree of social distancing. So we're looking at questions like, you know, can we bring the prep school and senior schools onto site through different entrances to sort of limit the amount of mixing at those crucial beginning and end of day phases and so on. But yeah, I think we will have to put social distancing measures in place in order to be allowed to be reopened from the government.
Thank you. We've got a question here from Andrea asking around students that aren't actually attending the online sessions. So what are you doing to encourage them to attend, and obviously how do you work with that?
Yeah, I mean, our attendance rates aren't 100% by any means, and we do follow up. So we are tracking it very, very carefully, and have done from the start. So one of the interesting roles of our TAs, for example, our TAs have been involved in a lot of the data collection and a lot of, you know, for the prep schools. It's been a very good use of TAs during the closure, rather than doing the sort of support they usually do. But we do follow up. So one of the SLT or the tutor or the head of house would follow up. And in 1 or 2 cases, we've had parents saying, "Look, we're just not doing this." And I mean, not so many in secondary, but we have had parents just say, "Look, we're not going to do home learning." And that will create a challenge. I mean, one of the challenges coming back is that we will inevitably have a range of people within a class who would normally be within quite a narrow range of where they've got to, will probably be in a much broader range than we used to. And I think one of the challenges we're going to have is finding out where they are, and then trying to sort of, in a sense, fix it. But I think, to use my marathon analogy, I think fixing it doesn't have to be a sprint. So if you fell over in a race, and we've seen it in the Olympics where somebody falls over, the key is not to sort of sprint and try and catch the pack up straight away. The key is to gradually, bring everyone up to the, get up to the level in a sustainable way. And I think that's going to be what we need to do going, in terms of catch up. So I think it's going to be quite difficult. And that will be one of the bigger challenges, because there will be, one end of the spectrum of people who haven't engaged fully with home learning. At the other end, we'll have people who have engaged tutors and you know, who have been supporting home learning, or where the parents are qualified and skilled and have got time and capacity to be able to support learning better than others. And I think that we are going to have to bring that community together, and we're going to have to bring people forward. But I think if you work on the basis that, you know, we are, you know, a body of professionals, we're used to people being at different places. You know, we have differentiation in the classroom quite regularly anyway. It's just, it will just be the next phase of just bringing everyone up to speed. But it will be a challenge, and it'll be a bigger challenge than it usually is.
Perfect, thank you. I think we've got time for just one more question. So we've got one here from Sean. How did you manage parental expectation versus staff wellbeing in terms of workload?
Well, I think that's, I mean, I think that's partly why we made the video around the change of timetable. That, you know, that actually, you know, putting that video out, I'll put the link up for that so that you can see that. I think that was a, you know, the fact it's clear about good communication. So we've got evidence for the fact that quite a big proportion, a third of our students, you know, were overwhelmed. We've got anecdotal evidence that parents were overwhelmed. We've got, you know, we've got sort of, you know, pressures on staff who again, you know, were coping, but, you know, we're going probably further, you know, the extra mile and a bit, you know, in order to keep the sort of thing going. And I think the whole thing needed realigning. And there's this, and obviously that, you know, there will be some people for whom, you know, it doesn't work, and we got 12% or so for whom, you know, the change was not, you know, it was not seen as a good thing. But, you know, 70% roughly of the group, you know, preferred the change. You know, 20% weren't, you know, that bothered. So, you know, that is that. You know, so it was sort of 10-12% who were actually worried about it. So I think you've got to pitch in and work out what's, you know, the best fit for the community. I think that was it. And I think the way we managed it with communication, good communication, the video is, I think, a very good example of a team tackling managing change. I think it's a sort of textbook example of how to manage change that not necessarily everyone's going to agree with. Some, you know, absolutely delighted by some work, but we didn't get very much pushback from it because it sort of worked. And I think that, you know, that the key in these things is having good reasons for doing things and then communicating those good reasons effectively. And I think in those cases, you know, if parents keep them pushing back, then, you know, just got to say, look, you know, we've had to come up with the best fit for the community, and this is it.
Great, thank you. So thank you everyone for joining today. That is all that we've got time for. We have managed to get through most of your questions. Just to let you all know that you will be emailed the recording of this webinar, hopefully get it across to you by the end of the week. But just finally, I say thank you very much, Mark, for joining us again, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Have a very good day. Nice to see you all.